Chapter 7: Metabolic Mayhem, the Invisible Hormonal Roller Coaster. Perhaps we can recognize our way out of patterns rather than repeating our way out of them. Patty Dye, Life as a Verb. As damaging as high glucose levels are for your brain, glucose is only one half of the story. The other half? Every glucose wave is automatically followed by an insulin wave. If you're metabolically healthy and you eat a whole foods diet, your glucose and insulin levels will rise and fall appropriately. But if you're metabolically healthy and eat too many of the wrong carbohydrates too often, or if you're metabolically unhealthy and eat more carbohydrate of any kind than your system can handle, your glucose and insulin patterns will be abnormal. Depending on how sugary your diet is and how damaged your metabolism is, you could see anything from glucose and insulin levels poking just above their usual safe limit to dramatic spikes and crashes that destabilize you from within. Remember that insulin is more than just a blood glucose manager. It's a master growth hormone, which means that it influences many other hormones, including hormones that regulate appetite, stress, reproductive cycles, and even blood pressure. Every time insulin rises and falls, it takes all of those other hormones along for the ride. Since one of insulin's responsibilities is to squirrel away incoming glucose molecules into your cells, the more glucose you eat, the more insulin it will take to bring your glucose back down to normal. So, the higher your blood glucose, the higher your blood insulin. Unnaturally steep insulin spikes can mean unnaturally steep drops in glucose, which can trigger complicated hormonal reactions. Sugar as a mood destabilizer. If your glucose is falling too fast or from too great a height, your glucose-hungry brain will wisely view your plummeting glucose as an emergency and respond by commanding your body to release a cocktail of hormones into your bloodstream to keep your glucose from dropping to dangerously low levels. This mixture includes appetite hormones that urge you to eat, as well as glucagon and adrenaline, which tell your liver to release more glucose into the bloodstream. Glucagon and adrenaline take care of the falling glucose issue, but adrenaline does much more than raise blood glucose. It is a powerful stress hormone that prepares you to cope with physically challenging or perilous situations. Adrenaline injects glucose and fat into your bloodstream for energy, shifts blood flow away from your digestive system and toward your large muscle groups, and stimulates your heart to pump more vigorously, all to prime you for fight or flight. This primitive hormonal reflex works well when you're in physical danger, but if all you've done is enjoyed a couple of cans of soda while watching TV, you could feel as if you're having a panic attack out of the blue for no good reason. In an experiment, researchers at Yale University gave healthy teenage boys a decaffeinated cola sweetened with 86 grams of glucose, about the same amount of sugar you'd find in two 12-ounce cans of soda. 4 to 5 hours after the boys drank the sugary cola, their adrenaline levels quadrupled, and they reported symptoms such as shakiness, sweating, weakness, and pounding heart. Since it takes nearly 5 hours for these sugar-driven adrenaline waves to wash over you, it's not always easy to make the connection between how you feel and what you ate and drank so much earlier. This emotional and physical reaction to going without food for 5 hours has become such a common phenomenon that it's earned itself the clever nickname hangry, hungry plus angry. But it is not normal. If you sometimes feel uncomfortably hungry, anxious, or unstable between meals, the simplest thing to try first is to remove the refined carbohydrates from your diet. Harvard endocrinologist and obesity prevention scientist Dr. David Ludwig showed that removing sugar and refined grains was all it took to prevent dramatic spikes in the adrenaline levels of overweight teenage boys. His research team tested 3 breakfasts, each one with a different glycemic index, or GI for short. The glycemic index is an estimate of how strongly foods raise blood glucose. High GI breakfast, instant oatmeal with table sugar, glucose plus fructose, and milk. Medium GI breakfast, steel-cut oatmeal with fructose and milk. Low GI breakfast, vegetable cheese omelet and fresh fruit. The sugary instant oatmeal breakfast triggered a dramatic rise in adrenaline, much higher than the steel-cut oatmeal breakfast, even though both meals contained the same amount of carbohydrate. The low GI breakfast, which contained no grains or sweeteners at all, and was somewhat lower in carbohydrate as well, was gentlest on glucose, insulin, and adrenaline levels. In his book, Always Hungry, Dr. Ludwig explains, adrenaline surged at 4 hours after the instant oatmeal, suggesting the brain had experienced a true metabolic crisis. Some of our participants looked frankly sweaty and shaky. The boys who had eaten instant oatmeal also felt hungrier, and when given free access to platters of food, consumed far more calories over the next 5 hours. A food-first approach to anxiety. Eating too many of the wrong carbohydrates too often can send insulin soaring, setting off a vicious cycle of hunger, overeating, and mood swings that leads some people to seek help from psychiatrists. Depending on how often these episodes happen and how much distress it causes you, a psychiatrist might diagnose you with panic disorder or binge eating disorder and might recommend cognitive behavioral therapy or prescribe anxiety medications. But why not look at food first? A 31-year-old Mexican-American Harvard postdoctoral student came to me requesting help with frequent panic attacks, irritability, constant food cravings, emotional eating, and sleepiness occurring 2 hours after meals. She was very health conscious and hoped to avoid medication, so I recommended she try a whole foods low carbohydrate approach. She changed her diet from this: breakfast, toast with peanut butter or Nutella, coffee with skim milk; lunch, salad with tuna or cheese and a piece of bread; dinner, pasta with cheese; favorite snacks, bananas and yogurt; to this: breakfast, 2 eggs with butter and guacamole; lunch, meat and non-starchy vegetable; dinner, meat and non-starchy vegetable; snacks, nuts and cheese. When asked how the new diet had affected her symptoms, she told me, "I don't know how I dealt with it because they all used to bother me a lot, but I would say that the symptoms are 90% gone." Her original diet was simpler and lower in ultra-processed foods and sweets than most I've seen in my career, yet it still contained too much refined carbohydrate, bread, chocolate, and pasta, to be safe for her metabolism. Notice she used the term emotional eating, a common issue that can be very upsetting to so many people who feel they cannot control their urge to eat when they are under stress. It feels for all the world as if the stress is what is driving the desire to eat, when in most cases, it's the other way around. Eating too many of the wrong carbohydrates too often causes a rise in stress hormones that urge us to eat, to stabilize our metabolism. In addition to adrenaline, falling glucose triggers the release of another stress hormone called cortisol. Unlike adrenaline, which is a simple, fast-acting hormone for sudden emergencies, cortisol is a sophisticated, slow-acting hormone that prepares your metabolism, your cardiovascular system, your immune system, and your brain for prolonged periods of stress. Rising cortisol tells your liver to make more glucose at all costs, even if it has to break down your muscle proteins to do it. Cortisol also weakens your immune system, raises your blood pressure, and carries stress messages to your brain that affect neurotransmitter balance and can damage the hippocampus, the brain's learning and memory center. Unstable or overactive cortisol is a common feature of many psychiatric conditions, including depression, anxiety, insomnia, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress disorder, and dementia. Understanding hormonal havoc. If you're like most people, you're probably including refined carbohydrates with every meal too, and perhaps snacking on them between meals as well, which could mean as many as 6 insulin spikes per day. Eating this way puts you on a hormonal roller coaster all day long and well into the night that can have a profound impact on your mood, energy, sleep, appetite, and multiple other aspects of your health and well-being. Other hormones that ride on the glucose-insulin roller coaster include appetite hormones like ghrelin, which your stomach releases to make you feel hungry, and leptin, which your fat cells release to make you feel full. Female reproductive hormones like estrogen also pay close attention to glucose and insulin levels so they can decide whether the conditions are right for pregnancy. When insulin rises, so can aldosterone, a hormone that tells your kidneys to hold on to more water and salt. This may cause you to retain fluid or even contribute to high blood pressure, especially if you have insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes. Unstable glucose and insulin can destabilize all of these hormones, increasing the risk for binge eating, blood pressure fluctuations, susceptibility to infection, and irregular menstrual cycles. Your age, metabolism, gender, body composition, genetics, diet, activity level, medications, and existing health issues all influence what your personal roller coaster looks and feels like. But most of us eventually pay an emotional or physical price for eating a high insulin diet. We tend to think of our hormones as controlling our eating behaviors, and this is partly true. But as you can see, the whole truth is that our eating behaviors control our hormones too, so the relationship goes both ways. Fortunately, you have a tremendous degree of control over your insulin levels. While there's no way to monitor your own insulin at home yet, it is easy to monitor your own glucose. Since high glucose is the main driver of high insulin, keeping your glucose in a healthy range is a powerful way to protect yourself from hormonal havoc. Master your metabolism using home glucose monitoring. If you have mood, concentration, or energy concerns that come and go, and you're curious about whether your food choices may be contributing to them, it is well worth testing your blood glucose at home to look for potentially problematic patterns. There are 2 ways to measure your glucose at home: with a fingerstick glucose meter or a continuous glucose monitor, or CGM. Fingerstick glucose testing involves pricking your finger to produce a drop of blood, placing that drop onto a test strip, then inserting it into a handheld meter that tells you what the glucose level of your blood is at that moment. The meters and strips are inexpensive, widely available, and don't require a prescription. Continuous glucose monitoring measures your glucose around the clock using a painless sensor patch that adheres to the surface of your skin. Each patch lasts for 10 to 14 days. Continuous glucose monitors, or CGMs, are available without a prescription in Canada and many European countries, but in the United States, they still require a prescription and aren't usually covered by health insurance. In the United States, patches start at around $70 each, and if you can afford it, even a single patch will give you up to 2 weeks' worth of valuable insight into your metabolism. If you can't obtain a CGM prescription from your doctor, there are online direct-to-consumer CGM subscription plans that include prescription services, but these are more expensive. If you're using the fingerstick method, it's helpful to check your glucose 1 to 3 times per day, and the best times to test are about 1 hour after you eat a meal that includes your favorite carbohydrates to see how your metabolism responds. You should also check your glucose anytime you feel shaky, moody, unfocused, or otherwise unwell. Once you've figured out how to eat to keep your glucose in a healthy range, you may not want or need to monitor your glucose very often, if at all. So think of this phase as an upfront investment in your health that will pay off in the long run by saving you money on medications, medical procedures, and clinic visits. Please note, the suggestions that follow are intended only for non-pregnant adults without type 1 or type 2 diabetes. If you are pregnant, have diabetes, or take any medications for blood sugar problems, please consult with a healthcare professional for personalized guidance about blood glucose monitoring and target glucose ranges. Metabolic red flags. The 3 most important things to look for when you're monitoring your glucose are 1. Glucose highs, hyperglycemia. Mild to moderate hyperglycemia, prediabetes range. Levels between 140 milligrams per deciliter and 199 milligrams per deciliter are considered prediabetes and are therefore very worrisome. Technically, prediabetes means your blood glucose is abnormally high, just not high enough yet for you to be officially diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. As we'll discover in the next chapter, even if you never develop type 2 diabetes, prediabetes itself is already a dangerous metabolic disease that deserves your full attention. Severe hyperglycemia, diabetes range. Levels of 200 milligrams per deciliter or higher are dangerous. If your glucose is rising into the diabetes range, contact a healthcare professional for additional guidance and support. 2. Glucose lows, hypoglycemia. Mild hypoglycemia. Glucose levels between 55 and 69 milligrams per deciliter fall into a gray area because some people tolerate them well and others don't. If your glucose falls into this range and you experience any symptoms of hypoglycemia, such as anxiety, nausea, shaking, sweating, dizziness, headache, hunger, racing heart, confusion, or poor coordination, drink 1 tablespoon of fruit juice, recheck your glucose in 15 minutes, and consult a health professional. If your glucose falls into this range but you feel fine, there may be nothing to worry about. It may simply mean it's time to eat. But it's always a good idea to run it by a medical professional to be sure. Severe hypoglycemia. Your blood glucose should never drop below 55 milligrams per deciliter. This is the definition of true medically concerning hypoglycemia and can be dangerous. Levels this low are most likely to occur in people who take medications that lower blood glucose, such as insulin. If your glucose ever drops below 55 milligrams per deciliter, drink 1 tablespoon of fruit juice, recheck your glucose in 15 minutes, and consult a health professional immediately, whether you notice symptoms of hypoglycemia or not, because some people can't sense low blood sugar. 3. Glucose instability. Glucose levels that swing up and down frequently or unpredictably are unhealthy and usually mean that you are eating too much carbohydrate for your personal metabolism. Even if your glucose stays within a healthy range all the time, sudden spikes or drops of 30 milligrams per deciliter or more can make you feel unstable, tired, or anxious, and put too much stress on your delicate insulin signaling system, which can lead to insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes over time. Hypoglycemic symptoms with normal blood glucose? Sometimes people experience symptoms that feel like hypoglycemia even though their blood glucose hasn't fallen below 70 milligrams per deciliter. In most people, symptoms of hypoglycemia don't occur because glucose is too low. They occur because glucose is falling too fast or from too great a height, causing their stress hormones to overreact. In these cases, the symptoms aren't being caused by low blood sugar. They're caused by stress hormones the body releases to prevent low blood sugar. Imagine a frustrated parent who has to repeatedly pull their toddler down off the kitchen counter so they won't burn themselves on the stovetop. The toddler may experience it as unpleasant and jarring, but it is happening for the child's own good. This protective hormonal reaction is fairly common and usually means that there are too many refined carbohydrates or too much carbohydrate in general in your diet for your metabolism to safely handle. If this happens to you, have something to eat so you'll feel better, but consider changing your diet to prevent it from happening again. Achieving healthy glucose goals. Remember, every time your blood glucose spikes and crashes, your brain glucose follows suit. Stable blood glucose means stable brain glucose, and that will go a long way toward improving your peace of mind. Your morning fasting glucose, before you've had anything to eat or drink except water, should be no higher than 99 milligrams per deciliter. Between 70 and 85 is ideal. Many factors contribute to high fasting glucose. If your morning fasting glucose is too high, you may have eaten too much carbohydrate the day before, or eaten too close to bedtime the night before. If your fasting glucose is consistently above 125 milligrams per deciliter, consult a healthcare professional. Any food that drives your glucose to 125 milligrams per deciliter or higher should be avoided. Aim to spend most of your day between about 70 milligrams per deciliter and 100 milligrams per deciliter. Keep your glucose below 125 milligrams per deciliter at all times, including 1 to 2 hours after meals, when it tends to be at its highest. You'll find a table of healthy fasting and after-meal glucose ranges in your accompanying PDF. If you see unhealthy peaks and valleys in your glucose level, adjust the quality and quantity of carbohydrates in your diet until your glucose quiets down and remains in a healthy range at all times. You can start by simply removing all the refined carbohydrate from your diet, which all of us should do anyway. If that doesn't help enough, you'll next want to reduce the total amount of carbohydrate in your diet. How low you'll need to go will depend on your metabolism. There's more detailed guidance about dietary changes in Chapter 16. Connecting the dots. Home glucose monitoring is a powerful tool that can show you whether the mental or physical symptoms you are having are related to your blood glucose levels. For example, my colleague Dr. Penny Figtree used a continuous glucose monitor to identify and solve problems with her glucose levels that had been causing lifelong discomfort. As she describes, porridge for breakfast has always seemed a very healthy breakfast option and one I had enjoyed for most of my life. However, one day, whilst wearing a continuous glucose monitor, I saw my blood glucose literally shoot up to more than 11 millimoles per liter, more than 200 milligrams per deciliter, and then drop back down to below 4 millimoles per liter, or below 72 milligrams per deciliter. This was half an hour after eating some unsweetened porridge. I was shocked. After repeated experiments, which my daughter used for a science project, I learned that a 35-gram sachet, which is 2/5 of a cup, of unsweetened traditional oats 100% Uncle Toby's whole grain rolled oats with water, always caused a spike to over 11 millimole per liter, which is over 200 milligrams per deciliter, and then a sudden drop back down. Even steel-cut oats caused a rise to around 10 millimole per liter or 180 milligrams per deciliter. Plain rice caused this spike too. The wonderful thing about this discovery is I have cured my lifelong reactive hypoglycemia. These spikes and then drops in blood glucose trigger symptoms of shaking, tremulousness, heart palpitations, brain fog, and tunnel vision. For my entire life, I have dreaded this feeling randomly coming on, but now I am cured. All it takes is mostly eating low carb and especially avoiding porridge for breakfast. Dr. Penny Figtree, MBBS, FRACGP, Port Macquarie, Australia. It's not always this straightforward, but in Dr. Figtree's case, all it took to cure decades of perplexing symptoms was a little curiosity, a CGM, and reducing her carbohydrate intake. I'll share more examples of how changing your diet can change your mind throughout the audiobook. Sugar, the other white powder? It's easy to understand why it's important to normalize glucose and insulin levels, but that doesn't mean it's easy to do. Looming behind the glucose-insulin metabolic roller coaster is the ominous shadow of the roller coaster of addiction. Craving, consumption, glucose spike, bliss. Insulin spike, glucose drop, craving. Many of us are addicted to sugar and don't realize it. Those of us who have struggled with unmistakably addictive behaviors, such as binge eating, intense cravings, and food secrecy, acknowledge, at least to ourselves if not publicly, that we have a problem. But for most people, sugar addiction can be difficult to recognize. This is because we've been taught to shamelessly love this substance from a very young age by well-meaning adults who, more often than not, are themselves addicted to sugar. We enjoy it, celebrate it, and expect to consume it every day. As Gary Taubes writes in The Case Against Sugar, imagine a drug that can intoxicate us, can infuse us with energy, and can do so when taken by mouth. Overconsumption of this drug may have long-term side effects, but there are none in the short term. No staggering or dizziness, no slurring of speech, no passing out or drifting away, no heart palpitations or respiratory distress. When it is given to children, its effects may only be more extreme variations on the apparent natural emotional roller coaster of childhood, from the initial intoxication to the tantrums and whining of what may or may not be withdrawal a few hours later. As both a plant-derived source of carbohydrate-based energy and a purified crystalline substance that reliably delivers instantaneous emotional gratification to the user, sugar blurs the lines between food and drug, making it just as challenging for addiction researchers to convict as for nutrition authorities to defend. The emerging science of sugar addiction tells us that sugar triggers the brain's reward circuits to release dopamine, a neurotransmitter that signals pleasure and motivates us to seek more of the same. Repeated use of sugar can eventually dull the dopamine pleasure response, leading to compulsive overeating. Sugar also delays the release of acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter that, among other duties, signals satiety in the brain, essentially taking down the stop signs and encouraging non-stop eating. After reviewing the available research in the field, scientists at the University of Bordeaux concluded that, at the neurobiological level, the neural substrates of sugar and sweet reward appear to be more robust than those of cocaine. Because sugar hijacks the hormones and neurotransmitter pathways that regulate your appetite and eating behaviors, when you are eating a diet that includes refined carbohydrates, you cannot trust your instincts. This is why the concept of intuitive eating fails so many people. Indeed, in a 2022 randomized controlled trial of 58 adults with obesity, an intuitive eating program made no difference in binge eating, emotional eating, or weight. As compelling as the science sounds, most of the research in this field has been conducted in animals, not people, leaving the door open to skepticism. Academics continue to debate whether sugar and other types of food addiction are real. But regardless of where the science may lead, it will never be able to tell you if you are addicted to sugar. Only you can know that. Removing refined carbohydrates from your diet is key to improving and protecting your metabolic health, and therefore your mental health. If you have any trouble eliminating sugar and all of the other refined carbohydrates that turn rapidly into sugar in your body, you may be more attached to sugar than you realized. Unawareness of sugar addiction is common, partly because unawareness of sugar consumption is common. Many of my patients earnestly tell me that their diets are low in sugar because they don't eat sweets, drink sugar-sweetened beverages, or add sugar to anything. But refined carbohydrates are so ingrained in our diets that most people eat them multiple times a day without realizing it. Sugar comes in a great many forms, some of which aren't even sweet. Bread, potato chips, pizza, pretzels, and polished grains are all high in refined carbohydrate and can be just as addictive as candy. As one woman I consulted with confided, "I could do a faceplant in a bowl of rice." I encourage you to explore your own relationship with sugar and other addictive ultra-processed foods. Consider the following questions taken from the Modified Yale Food Addiction Scale, or MyFAS. You'll find a link to the full questionnaire in Appendix A of the accompanying PDF. Do you sometimes have difficulty controlling your intake of certain foods? Do you find yourself consuming certain foods even though you're not hungry? Do you sometimes feel sluggish or fatigued from overeating? Does your eating behavior cause you significant distress? Have issues related to food and eating interfered with your ability to function effectively? Do you keep consuming the same types or amounts of food despite significant emotional and/or physical problems related to your eating? If you've identified any hallmarks of addictive eating, you'll find tools to help set you on the road to recovery in Part 4. Knowledge is power. As tasty, convenient, and fun as it may be to keep eating refined carbohydrates on a regular basis, that way of life comes at a steep price that may include mood disturbances, addictive eating, physical disability, and early death. Understanding how the foods you eat affect your metabolism and mental health empowers you to make healthier decisions that can change the course of your future.